In our last video, we witnessed Conan of Chimeria's first taste of leadership in the service of Guerilla, beating back the hordes of the undead sorcerer Thugra Khotan. The decades to follow would see him grow further into the role of a leader, inspiring loyalty and terror across the breadth of the world. He had fought against his former master and rival, Yezdegerd of Turan, leading the Kazaki Free Companions of the Steppes as their hetman. He had raided far-off Vendia ahead of the Afghuli tribesmen, forged brigands into an army to overthrow the usurper queen of Kamran, and entered into legend as the fearsome pirate lord known as Amra, the Lion of the Black Coast. But his greatest test and his greatest conquest lay ahead of him in the mightiest kingdom of the Hyborian age, Aquilonia, an old and proud empire laid low by the tyranny of its mad king Numedides. Now, we don't recommend trying to achieve all these feats yourself, and instead use a shortcut to receiving a high title by using the sponsor of this video, Established Titles. They sell small plots of land in Scotland, which are sought after because of a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English. But to protect these lands, a tree is planted with every order, and Established Titles supports charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. So it's a fun and novel way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland while helping global reforestation efforts. You'll get at least 1 square foot of land in Scotland with a unique plot number and a certificate to prove it. This allows you to officially get Lord or Lady on your credit cards, plane tickets and more. You can also get maps to show your new estate, including the immensely detailed hand-drawn 1611 map by John Speed, held by the National Library of Scotland. It makes a great last-minute gift, and they even have couple packs that come with adjoining plots of land. The first 200 plots bought via our link will all be put together within a few minutes of each other next to the Wizards and Warriors plot, so act fast to join our little union of forest territories. Check out their Black Friday sale for discounts, plus if you use our code WIZARDS, you'll get an extra 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/wizards to get yourself a title or give it as a gift and help support the channel. In recent years, the perversions of King Numedides of Aquilonia had grown ever darker, his cruelty and thirst for soft flesh giving way to baths of blood and the dark rituals of the sorcerer Tholandra Thu, who promised immortality to the Aquilonian monarch. Though far from the first magic user to make a puppet of a king in the Hyborian age, Thu had a far more pragmatic mindset than the likes of Malaket's Kamran Akkad, his mastery of the arcane arts not dulling his courtly talents as a politician and schemer. Conan and Numedides had history already, and had not always been foes. Though in his youth, Conan had first bloodied himself in battle against Aquilonians, part of the wild horde that overran Fort Venarium on Aquilonia's frontier with Chimeria, in more recent years he had served in Numedides' army, rising to become a renowned general for his victories fighting the Picts at the Thunder River and Velitrium. His rise would come with an even more sudden fall, however, when the paranoid Numedides, fearful of the mighty Outlander's popularity, turned on his general and forced Conan to flee into exile to avoid execution, departing Aquilonia to the wilderness of the Picts he had so recently warred against. However, Conan's exile would not be a long one. In the depths of the Pictish wilderness, he made 2 surprising discoveries. First, the hidden treasure cave of the famed pirate Trenikos, whose buried wealth dwarfed the treasuries of kingdoms, and second, a remote wooden fortress built by another exile, the Zingaran Count Corzetta. Tensions grew higher with the arrival of 2 rival pirate captains, Strombani and Black Serrano. Though Corzetta had in truth come to the wilderness fleeing the wrath of the wizard Thothamon, whom he had once cheated out of payment for a dark bargain, both pirates were convinced the Count had come seeking the treasure of Trenikos. However, attacks from Picts and the reveal of Conan's knowledge of the treasure's location eventually drove the 4 into an uneasy rogues alliance. After schemes and betrayals from all parties, the enterprise nearly came to naught with the fall of Corzetta's fortress to Picts and the death of Corzetta and both captains. But fortune smiled on Conan in the form of Count Trocero of Poitain, a friend and ally of Conan's who had followed the divinations of the Mitran priest Dexathius to find the exiled barbarian general and recruit him for a rebellion to overthrow Numedides. with the treasure of Tranikos to bankroll their insurrection. Conan and his unexpected rescuers left the Pictish wilderness by war galley to Messentia, capital of Argos, there to plot the toppling of a despot. Messentia would provide a staging ground for the raising of Conan and Trochero's mercenary army. King Milo of Argos was an old friend of Count Trochero's and no friend of Numidides. During the reign of the mad tyrant's uncle and predecessor, large swaths of land along the Alamein river had been seized from Argos by Aquilonia, and the grudges ran deep between Argos and its more powerful, domineering neighbour. Selling the vast wealth of Tranikos, Conan and Trochero soon raised over 10,000 warriors, camping and drilling outside Messentia as even more Aquilonian deserters, exiles and fortune seekers flocked to the returned general's banner. But among the thousands of eager and loyal soldiers, two newcomers had come to Conan's camp with treachery in their hearts. First was Quesado, a Zingaran spy in the employ of Thalandra Thu, who played the role of a drunken layabout sellsword in order to infiltrate Conan's camp. The second was Alcina, Thu's apprentice and catspaw, who posed as a Messantian dancing girl and became Conan's mistress after he overheard Quesado telling tales of her beauty. When Conan's forces finally left Messentia on the road to Tarantia, it was with these two unseen enemies in their midst, informing the foe of their movements. Standing between Conan's army and Aquilonia was the Border Legion under General Procas, an experienced and skilled commander, but one long out of favour in court and a target of Thalandra's machinations. Based on the Aquilonian side of the Alamein River in Trochero's native Poitain, they could control the three safe fords and make any crossing difficult, despite Conan having the larger army. The rebels had one major advantage. Poitain was one of the provinces most hostile to King Numidides, and partisans in the province were preparing to raise it in revolt, promising to send a bloodied arrow to Conan as a signal when the revolt was ready. However, for such an uprising to have any meaning, Conan's army would first have to make the dangerous crossing of the Alamein. Conan's advance was a hurried one. Pressured by the growing displeasure of King Milo at the large foreign army at his borders, and hoping to march on Tarantia before harvest season brought potential recruits back to their fields, Conan would have no choice but to attempt to force a crossing, splitting his army into three, and preparing to march as soon as the signal from Trochero's partisans arrived. In the central, largest river crossing, a small force under Trochero's right-hand man, Prospero, would camp and threaten to cross, with extra tents and horses to feign a much larger number. With the Aquilonians hopefully taking this for the main army and focusing their defense in the center, Trochero and Conan would cross at the eastern and western crossings with the bulk of the army, falling on Procas in a pincer movement. But as sound as the plan was, it would be undone by Alcina's spying. Overhearing Conan and Trochero's plan as she feigned sleep in the general's tent, the plan and the awaited signal were transmitted by magic to Thalandra Thu, and from Thu on to Procas. The following day, a bloodied arrow was indeed delivered to Conan's camp, but as a ruse by Procas, luring Conan into his trap before their allies could muster. The resulting battle would be nothing short of a disaster for the rebels under Conan. Despite marching their units in and out of tree cover to suggest a larger army, and blowing horns enough for a force 10 times their size, Prospero's diversionary force found the central crossing all but deserted. But on the flanks, Procas's preparedness and the poor scouting of the inexperienced rebel horsemen led both Conan and Trochero to lead their forces into ambushes. As the rebels waded through the almost chest-high water of the Alamein, archers and crossbowmen sprung from the foliage on the north bank, peppering them with deadly missile fire and causing panic to break out. The foremost rebels, who managed to cross the river before the trap was sprung, were cut down by Procas's cavalry, who continued their charge to cut bloodied trails in the disorganized mass of rebels in the river. Unable to maintain the discipline of his panicked troops, Conan soon fled with what survivors he could muster, with a downpour of heavy rain come evening hiding both him and the similarly defeated Trochero from the Aquilonian cavalry hunting survivors across the river. While the death toll was significant, the blow to morale the disaster inflicted was far worse, with most of the survivors simply deserting into the forest in hopes of reaching safety. the remainder of the scattered host slowly regrouping after the disaster into a force barely stronger than 1,500, which withdrew back through the Saxula Pass to the plain of Palos. Conan's misfortune would only grow in the aftermath. Informed of the battle's outcome by Alcina, Thlandra Thu decided to rid himself of both Conan and his rival Procas now that the commander was no longer needed to keep the rebels at bay. On her master's orders, Alcina poisoned Conan with the deadly powder of the Purple Lotus, leaving him for dead and departing the rebel camp. Thu, meanwhile, had Numidides send a letter to Procas, ordering him to cross the river and wipe out the remaining rebels in Argos. Surviving the poison thanks to his legendary strength, but left weakened and bedridden, Conan's cause might have seemed doomed. But in a stroke of irony, his salvation would come from one of the same traitors responsible for his ruin. For his work spying on the rebel army, Quesado had been promoted to the diplomatic corps as ambassador to Argos. But though a skilled spy, he made a poor diplomat, gravely insulting King Milo by attempting to threaten him into helping Aquilonia round up and destroy the rebel remnants. Instead, Milo sent a strong force of horsemen north to the Alamein, with orders to drive off any Aquilonian incursion. Their arrival, just as the rebel and Aquilonian armies were about to meet for their final clash, suddenly turned a last stand into a tense stalemate, and put Procas in a deadly bind. Though his border legion outnumbered the rebels even with the arrival of Milo's cavalry, to attack now would mean a war with Argos that Aquilonia could little afford in its current state of turmoil. However, to retreat would mean disobeying a direct order from his king, inviting accusations of cowardice. Either way, his enemies in court would spring at the chance to see him disgraced or executed, leaving Procas to delay the attack his army had been prepared to deliver. A few hours later, a second force appeared to tip the scales. The intact rearguard from Trochero's force, which had escaped the disaster under the leadership of Baron Groda and numbered another 1,500 to double Conan's army. Now outnumbered, Procas signalled his army to withdraw, hoping the sudden imbalance in numbers would forestall Numidides' anger. Seeing his foe retreating, Conan hoped to pursue them through the pass, dealing what damage they could while they filed through the passes and across the river.
Unfortunately, the Argosian horsemen under Prince Cassio were under orders to fight for the Aquilonians only if they attempted to push further into Argos, and would not take the offensive against them with the rebels, despite Cassio's sympathy for Conan's cause. But here, Conan's experience in Turan would serve him well. Remembering the mounted archers that formed the core of that Eastern Kingdom's army, Conan asked Cassio to lend him 500 horses. After all, the king's order bound only the soldiers, not their mounts. What horses the rebel army had left were underfed and exhausted, but with 500 strong Argosian mounts, Conan could mount his Basonian archers to harry the retreating Aquilonians. Though his men were unable to fire from horseback, they waged an effective guerrilla offensive over the following days, riding in small groups into longbow range of the enemy, dismounting to fire, and vanishing like smoke in the face of resistance. On his way back through the Saxula Pass, Procas's army was further damaged by an avalanche of boulders prepared by Conan's scouts. Despite his skill as a soldier, the Aquilonian general lacked Conan's mastery of irregular warfare, won through years of tribal warfare and piracy. And while the attrition meant little to the border legion's overall numbers, it caused a rapid deterioration of their morale. Finally crossing back over the Alamein after 3 days of harassment, volleys from 200 of Conan's archers gave the Aquilonians a taste of what the rebels had suffered at their hands, and Procas himself was left wounded and unable to travel by an arrow in his leg. Beaten and humiliated, the border legion made camp on the Alamein's north bank to turn back any attempts at a second crossing. Despite the losses inflicted by Conan's hit-and-run attacks, the numbers were still more favourable for the border legion than they had been in the rebels' first crossing, and the liberation of Aquilonia might well have ended here in stalemate, if not for the misplaced plotting of Thlandra Thu. With Quesado and Alcina now both gone from the rebel camp, neither they nor the wizard they served was aware Conan had survived the poisoning. Thinking the rebel army was leaderless and no longer a threat, Thu decided it was now safe to eliminate his rival Procas, sending Alcina as his assassin.
claiming to bear a message from the mage. She secured a private meeting in the general's tent, only to mortally injure him with a poisoned dagger. The old warrior would sell his life dearly in his last moments though, with the amulet used to communicate with her master being torn free in the struggle and left behind in Alcina's hurry to flee the camp. In the morning, the discovery of Procas's death, declared a suicide by his replacement, Count Ascalante, an inexperienced and power-hungry noble under Thlandra Thu's sway, caused the Border Legion's already flagging morale to plummet, with the unlikeliness of the suicide claim spurring distrust and suspicion towards their new leadership. Thus, while made up of some of the most experienced soldiers in Aquilonia, the Border Legion would be little prepared for what would come next. As mentioned previously, Poitain had been on the brink of revolt when Conan's army of liberation had first arrived, but the disaster at the Alamein and the rebel withdrawal to the plains of Argos had left the population too afraid of Numidides' harsh reprisals to turn on the crown. But now, with Conan again camped across the river, Procas dead, and the Border Legion licking its wounds, Trochero's propagandists set the planning of months into motion. Just a few nights after Procas's death, the city of Calario erupted in a well-planned rebellion, Poitanians killing guards at their posts, looting the armory, and hanging the Aquilonian governor and tax collector. Following this, the victorious rebels made their way swiftly south, reaching the Alamein before word of the successful insurrection. With fog shrouding the early morning darkness and the loss of Procas's skilled leadership, the Aquilonians were caught off guard by the surprise attack from friendly territory. With Conan's army taking advantage of the fog and the distraction to launch their own attack, and Ascalante deserting at the first sign of defeat, the skilled and experienced Border Legion rapidly lost its discipline and disintegrated, some fighting in a confusing darkened melee, while far more threw down their weapons in surrender. Conan's campaign at the Alamein, despite its disastrous beginnings, would end as a triumph. In the aftermath of the victory, the barbarian warrior's renown and popularity as a former general and war hero allowed him to sway many from the Border Legion to join his cause, including Ascalante's former second-in-command, the self-serving but skilled Baron Grommel, and on his arrival in Calario, new recruits and allies flocked to his lion standard, with the northern barons pledging their allegiance and men of Poitain volunteering to join his ranks in numbers greater than could be armed or equipped. Though this was only the first step on his long road to Tarantia, it would surprisingly be the last major battle won through conventional force of arms, despite the larger Aquilonian armies still standing in his path. At the Brazilian forest, both armies would trust in sorcery to win the day. Conan would see victory here, his keen senses allowing him to save his army from Thlandra Thu's magical landslide trap, while the satyrs of the forest, promised peace and friendship by Conan, who had saved some of their number being hunted for Thu's rituals, would use their pipes to cast madness over the encamped Aquilonians. And following this magical victory, it would be Conan's sword arm alone that won him Tarantia and its ruby throne. Though 25,000 Aquilonians under Count Ulrich stood poised to drive the rebels from the capital, turncoats among the Black Dragons, the elite royal guard of Aquilonia, who in recent years had seen and suffered through the madness of Numidides more closely than any, smuggled Conan, the priest Dexathius, and some of his loyal men within the near unguarded palace itself. Here, protected from the unprepared Thu's magic by Dexathius, the wanderer from Cameria slew the newly self-proclaimed deity Numidides and drove Thlandra Thu to flight, being proclaimed King Conan and ending the civil war before the two armies could meet in pitched battle. In the years to follow, Conan would prove himself one of the greatest monarchs of the Hyborian age, but rulership would bring many new challenges for the barbarian swordsman, and more battles still lay ahead.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Established Titles. Buy a small plot of land in Scotland and become a lady or a lord, or give this title as an amazing and easy gift. In return, Established Titles plants a tree to protect the pristine forests of our planet. Take advantage of their early Black Friday sale and use our discount code WIZARDS at establishedtitles.com/wizards to get a further 10% off.
Our series on the Hyborian world of Conan will continue, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.